It's on. It's on. It's all right now, guys. Get it on, Larry.
What else have they told you to do, Al?
Can you guys hear us? We still have it on.
Sound, faces, and voices of war. We will hear about these and more from Adam Housley and all our stellar panelists, bringing their cross-section of expertise to today's live webcast. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to today's digital dialogue, Navigating Tensions in War Coverage. It's presented by the Diversity Committee of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences of San Francisco and Northern California. I'm Odette Alcazaran-Keeley, DEI Chair of this chapter's Board of Governors. This event is part of our series of initiatives anchored in the organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion mission. We look forward to the compelling perspectives of our speakers about tensions in the region, the complex contexts of and desolation of the Middle East conflict and humanitarian crises there, and tensions at home, in our campuses, and in our newsrooms. The DEI and Belonging framework profoundly grounds a newsroom culture that authentically embraces varied, including marginalized or underrepresented perspectives. It sharpens the lens by which news is covered. Recent reports have pointed to DEI training as a contributing force to more nuanced, powerful storytelling, especially in conflict zones, to our journalistic mission of the relentless pursuit of truth, driven by accuracy, cultural competency, and respect for diverse views. It guides journalists and newsroom leaders to determine choices of sources and what voices need to be balanced in covering issues. As one resource in my main post directing the Maynard 200 Journalism Fellowship Program of the Maynard Institute, our work is grounded in our signature DEIB framework, Fault Lines, which emboldens news leaders to dismantle bias and systemic racism in their own organizations. This is crucial in the coverage of war, as we also see that many journalists who hail from communities directly in the crosshairs of the region's hostilities are attacked for their reporting and for who they are. Today's event and all activities of the NATAS SF NorCAL chapter are governed by our DEI values. We ask that all participants and viewers of this forum respect each other's views and express them in a professional manner. Disrespect, personal attacks, and acts of discrimination are unacceptable in all our platforms. It is now my privilege to introduce our outstanding panel. First, Professor Lisette Poole. She served as a Middle East journalist for the Associated Press and the Times of London. She's currently a journalism and communications lecturer at California State University, East Bay. Jim Jacobs is news director at KMPH Fox 26, Fresno. He was also formerly a newsroom leader at KCRA and KOVR in Sacramento, and also at KNTV Bay Area. He's a Board of Governors member of NATAS SF NorCal. Anthony Mata is Investigations Bureau Chief for the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office. He was also Chief of Police formerly for the City of San Jose, California. And Adam Housley served as a war reporter for Fox News and was also former reporter at KCPM-NBC in Chico and KTXL Sacramento. He is also a former Board of Governors member of NATAS SF NorCal. You saw highlights of his international war reporting in the earlier video clip. I'd like to now turn it over to our moderator, Professor Bob Rucker. He previously served as a national news correspondent in San Francisco for CNN. He's also a journalism professor and director emeritus at San Jose State University, and he's a Board of Governors member of NATAS SF NorCal. Thank you, Bob, for leading today's discussion.
Well, thank you, Odette, and hello and welcome to everyone. It's been 6 months since our last close-up look at television professionals here and abroad and what they've been up against covering the war between Israel and Hamas. An astonishing series of events have taken place since October 7th's surprise attack that shocked the world's community. Hamas forces somehow managed to cross a heavily secured border and kill 1,200 Israelis. and take 200 hostages, including people of all ages and from different countries, attending a music concert, ironically, celebrating continuing peace in the region. An American president would soon fly into an active war zone to offer reassuring bear hugs, seen live on TV, to an embattled Israeli prime minister who would then quickly build up his military firepower with American superpower assistance. Israel responded with such determination that eventually a public warning aired on live TV would come from the same occupant of the White House. In the meantime, Iran would fire hundreds of missiles into Israel, testing for all the world to see the much celebrated Iron Dome defense technologies. And then they stopped, calming global fears of a world war, at least for the moment. Our attention next would quickly turn to heart-wrenching images of catastrophic humanitarian crisis of people caught in the middle, starving and begging with empty food pots and pans in Gaza that would ignite both worldwide anger and action. Israel had promised not to target innocent people in harm's way, but pictures that managed to get out told a story of errant missile attacks intended for hundreds of Hamas leaders and devout followers, but instead devastated Palestinian hospitals and neighborhoods, killing hundreds of children, families, even humanitarian food delivery volunteers. Just a remarkable series of events in just a very short time. So let me call in Adam Housley to join me. You're well-traveled in the region. You know the people as an international journalist. You know the politics. But what are TV crews up against when they're dealing with these type of circumstances?
Well, I mean, first of all, you're up with having to find the truth. I mean, that's the most important thing, right? To be there and to wade through a lot of the propaganda that's out there on both sides. You know, you mentioned some of the things that have happened, and you also have to realize that in that district, in that region, you have Hamas, which is willing to do anything, including putting tunnels and weapons under hospitals and under schools. So there's really no easy answer when it comes to either side right now. But I think as a journalist, you have to find as much truth as you can throughout that. There's a lot of, again, propaganda on both sides. There's a lot of, they're really waging their own communicative battle on both sides, separately from the actual physical battle. And as a journalist, it's, if you're not there on the ground or you haven't been there on the ground, it makes it even more difficult. I said that's the number one priority is to make sure that you get the information right. Number two priority is to keep you and your crew safe. One of the times I was in Israel, one of my trips, I ended up reporting for, several weeks, 3 or 4 weeks there. And the first part of that reporting, I knew that one of my colleagues, actually two of my colleagues, had been kidnapped in Gaza. And so we weren't allowed to report about it. No one knew about it except for our internal folks at Fox, where I worked, and also a few other networks that we had contacted to make sure they didn't report on it either, because the idea was no one should know about it. Let's work on this with Hamas and get our journalists out, which thankfully we did safely. But yeah, as a journalist, I was also in Pakistan when Danny Pearl was taken. As a journalist, it's finding the truth and making sure you and your crew don't become part of the story.
Very good. And we're going to talk about the relationship of all of the news organizations when you're in that part of the world. But someone else who's on our panel is an incredible communicator and also an international journalist and Bay Area college professor. Lizette Poole lived in and reported on the Middle East for 14 years. She was born and raised in Egypt. Lizette grew up knowing the region, its people, its politics, and learned how to navigate the deep emotions and tensions coming from both sides of this war. Lizette, you and I have talked about this. Why don't you share some of the thoughts about the people there and how they cope with this every day?
Well, thank you for inviting me. One of the problems that I think we constantly face is that over the years, one group has been discredited and the other group has been conditioned. So if I say, in the eyes of most people, you would say, oh, this is an Arab, his views don't count. Well, his views do count. He's a human being and his views do count. So over time, we've had a conditioning of the readership in the United States and in Europe, where the views of an Arab or a Palestinian were secondary to the views of an Israeli or a Jew who was living in that area. That goes back, I think, to a little bit of the colonialism era and the settlement of colonialism in the Middle East. So you have to combat that in one way, and be able to voice the views of the Arab population in a humanitarian way so that they can be convincing. And if you use their own words, they are convincing. If you know the language, they are convincing. So rather than go through a translator and listen to the translation being done, if you know the Arabic language and if you can converse with them, you get the real truth and the real sentiment that is behind it.
Very good, Lizette. There's something I want to tap into with you and Adam later that I heard from Sarah Seidner. I'll tell you more about that in just a little bit. But thank you. Let's bring in Jim Jacobs to join our conversation. You have the job I've always wanted, dude. News director, the chief newsroom decision maker when it comes to local community connections, coverage, and public reactions to major stories. But Jim, what do you have to do to help your young journalist news team in terms of critically thinking to identify interesting local angles to that Middle East story?
Absolutely, Bob. Thank you. It is an interesting time in our industry right now where we have a lot of, I'd say, early career journalists that are coming out of college, coming into our industry that don't have much of a worldview. And I want to encourage them to be reading. I don't know that enough students are coming out of journalism schools reading enough information, reading New York Times, reading a number of different things to get more well-versed in their world. I think they come out of college now, and unfortunately, their worldview is based on what they had in their phone, which is based on their algorithm, which is based on what they like. And they're going to get fed more and more and more of what they like. And so their worldview becomes more and more myopic as opposed to a broader perspective, which journalists absolutely need to have. And so trying to teach the young people to, pick up a newspaper, or at least look at the online version, right? We don't have newspapers very much anymore, but to at least read as much as they can and look at a different number of sources, because each one might have their own certain bias, whether that's a national cable outlet or a international broadcaster. They also have to look at the agenda that might be behind some of those things as well. So teaching the young people that there are potential hidden agendas and there's blind spots that they need to be looking out for.
And you know that they're going to be thrown into situations like protests on college campuses, because you brought us a story that we're going to share with people right now and then talk about it.
Signs were used to spread the message: Palestine will be free, boycott bombs, ceasefire, and we cannot accept genocide. Organizers shared the message.
I just want everyone to know that using your voice is very, very powerful. Knowing where your power lies when you're in communities, when you're in gatherings like this, really does matter.
Fresno State President Saul Jimenez Sandoval stopped by for a few minutes.
I think they want information, and they want people to know their side. So if it's student-led, I am keen on supporting my students.
Free, free, free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine!
It was an unscripted demonstration, students speaking their minds in support of their homeland.
I'm Palestinian, and I don't stand for the genocide that's happening in Gaza, so I want to call for a ceasefire. That's what I'm out here to do.
The crowd began to thin roughly 90 minutes into the sit-in. Organizers were pleased.
It's ironic. It's exactly what Odette was talking about earlier. Professional, respectful, honest, clear, well shot, well recorded. Tell us a little bit very quickly about who produced this.
Sure. This was done by one of our veteran journalists that went out there 40 years in the business. We weren't sure what to expect because we had seen what was happening on the national level. And so we were prepared and went into this with eyes wide open. And as it turned out, it was a very, as you saw, peaceful sit-in where the university president even went in and listened to a lot of the people that were there. And after 90 minutes, it was done. So I think this is a very impactful report because if you look at just the national news, you would think that there's mayhem on college campuses across the country. But I think where the local folks that come in, and I think it's essential that we have local boots on the ground in these communities that tell these stories. A lot of what you just saw, I think, is happening across the country. And so having local journalists embedded in their communities and understanding the heartbeat of their communities is essential to giving that information out there. And as it turned out, that piece of video just on our YouTube page was viewed 5,000 times or more. So people they're hungry for what's actually happening. They're hungry for the truth. And they think they do lean on local journalists that are based in those communities to give that to them in a respectful manner.
Very well said. And I do hope that they're paying attention as developments go along. Coming up, we'll have a few tips on where they can get some background information. Thanks, Jim. When it comes to safety issues and student protests, sometimes local police have been called in. Now, Anthony Mata, first I want to congratulate my friend. I know him from San Jose. Congratulations on your new job, Anthony.
Good morning, Bob. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
You're more than welcome. You know, up until recently, you were the chief of police in San Jose, the nation's 10th largest city. And I remember you telling me in 2020, right after the killing of George Floyd, your officers were called to bring order to the streets of downtown San Jose. But here's the question. What's the protocol for city police to be called onto a college campus?
Sure, Bob. That's a good question. So, as we know, as we saw, or we're seeing throughout these past few months, is a lot of educational institutions have their own police departments, and they're limited in resources. So when they have a big event, they would call the local or their adjoining police department to assist. It depends on situation. Usually it's through mutual aid request or just through requests that they have standing when a campus needs some assistance. So in this case, in San Jose, we would have an agreement with San Jose State University in terms of the types of incidents that we would come onto campus, because that campus is their jurisdiction. It's a state institution. So they have their policies, procedures in place. And then when we're asked or invited to come on campus, we have to have that agreement with the university, because we have different training. We should have the same training, but we have different policies that we have to implement when we.
And Tony, I'm curious, if things get out of control, we're going to look at some examples or talk about examples back east, taking over buildings and all of that. Does that change the dynamic, or can you act on your own?
Well, again, when we respond to these First Amendment activities, right? The priority of law enforcement is to protect the freedoms of everyone, right? The freedom of religion, speech, and the press, and protect everyone's rights to a peaceful assembly and to ensure the safety of everyone. So, yes, we will take the required legal steps to discourage unlawful conduct, unlawful behavior whenever it occurs.
Very good. Because I remember the days when I was in college where sit-ins at the president's office or somewhere important, we didn't get the police called on us, but we were warned if we go too far, we could be arrested. Very good. Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. You know, before the COVID pandemic, a San Jose State University journalism graduate went to Columbia University in New York to earn his master's degree. His name is Trevin Smith, and he and I recently spoke on Zoom about how that campus in the Big Apple reacted, because they were at the epicenter of student protests all across the country. Smith believes this generation of young people sees bringing police on campus, known for free expressions of ideas and the right of assembly, as Tony said. Well, this former student of mine says his campus saw it as a betrayal of trust by top university officials.
You see authority figures that you may or may not look up to in your university sending police to you. Maybe those people haven't even visited you to talk to you face to face or sent someone on behalf of the university to talk to you. That's even more of a slap of the face in the face. And for people who experience that maybe you lose a part of that connection to the university going forward. Not to say that police should never be there, but it's should be taken into consideration that this is a highly, highly sensitive moment. You're not just demonstrating at City Hall or a courthouse or a public park, right? This is your university. You're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to be here, most likely. Your parents have probably sacrificed a tremendous amount to send you here. And for certain communities too, it's important to remember that to potentially be arrested in a situation like that could come off as deeply, deeply offensive for a student who in their heart is thinking they're doing the right thing.
Very good. You'll hear more from Trevin in just a little bit. But all of these news angles and many, many more emanate from this age-old conflict more than 4,000 years in the making and more than 7,000 miles away from this San Francisco-based chapter. Now, here's that tip I promised you earlier. Broadcasters are playing an essential role in educating all viewers who wonder why Middle East issues flare up and are constantly grabbing public attention. Well, we have a helpful tip for all of our Television Academy journalists. We ask you to consider checking out the great source of background information. And if you would put that font on the screen, go to this website from PBS and their focus on the Frontline documentary series. It's an excellent resource. There's a collection of daily news stories from the time periods of our lives that talk about and are pieced together to give us that aha moment. Oh, that's what this is all about. That's why they keep having problems between Israel, the Palestinians, the United States, and Arab nations. It's intertwined. As Jim said earlier, young journalists don't always get that exposure to knowledge in college. But in television journalism, on any level, if you don't understand what you're walking into, you're asking for it. So we recommend that all of us as journalists check out that website, and we look forward to hearing about other sources to share.
Yeah, I wanted to weigh in on that too, because when I went to the Middle East for the first time, I was a international relations major. I mean, political science, but I've always loved international relations. I got my master's in that as well. And before my first trip to the Middle East, I wanted to read up. I'd obviously studied the region. I've heard a lot of different, insight on the region. When first time I went was before social media, so the early parts of the 2000s. So you didn't have the little snippets being thrown at you. You didn't have a lot of the propaganda being slapping you in the face at every turn. So I actually found a book that I recommend people to read if you can find it. It's usually still out there on Amazon. It's called War Without End by Anton LaGuardia, who was stationed there, I believe, for the Times of London for a number of years in the Middle East. And the first 100 pages or so of that book, again, called War Without End, is pretty tedious. It goes back thousands of years, but it gives you a really important background in the region. His book went all the way up to about 2002, which was the second Intifada, which was my first trip there. I believe it's been updated to bring in more recent events to go along with it. But it gives you such an incredible resource and background, because you hear these people talk about, colonialism and which really goes back to the Western, well, I'll say the French and the English drawing the lines for many of the countries in the Middle East. But when you talk about, people that don't really know what they're speaking in regards to the history of the region, really Christians, Jews, Arabs, they all have claims to the region, and they have for thousands of years. So it's not like this group came along in the last 50 years. I mean, people have been there and they've been intertwined with so many different backgrounds for so many different years that we have to take all that into consideration when you're reporting on this region. And again, the book I recommend, one of the several books, is called War Without End, and it's just fabulous.
This panel is wonderful.
I'd like to recommend one too.
Please do.
How about this one?
The 100 Years War.
Yeah,
on
but that's more. But it's not more one. I mean, listen, I understand that. I've actually looked at that book as well. The problem is that book isn't. Yeah, it's great for background, but that gives you one side, right? I'm talking about one that's a little bit more. Try to give you both sides of the issue. I mean, you can find both. You can find books that obviously fight for Israel or fight for Palestine. But to try to find one just give you a broad background is what I'm speaking of with War Without End. It gives you kind of a broad background. It doesn't take an Israeli side or a Palestinian side. I felt it was really good just giving you kind of all the different fingers that go into this.
And let me interject and say, Lizette and Adam, if you would come on the screen with me, I'd like you to talk about this notion of knowing what you're talking about and the people there. how do they react to TV journalists from the United States? I spoke to one yesterday, and she was very clear. They don't think we can be trusted.
Well, I mean, you have to understand, again, going into the region, you have Al Jazeera, you have Haaretz, you have very specified, journalists. When the U.S. comes in, obviously the U.S. is viewed as being pro-Israel. So automatically you're going to have people that are going to be skeptical of your reporting. It was essential for us when we were there to have a strong Palestinian connection with very good Palestinian producers. And we, spent a lot of time, obviously, in the West Bank and also in Gaza, and we still do. And I think that's essential to have those connections to the region. Obviously, she has a stronger connection being born in Egypt. But as a journalist, many of us coming from the outside in, have to make sure that we have those strong connections on both sides. You can't, especially being from the U.S., there is going to be some skepticism right away because of that. At the same time, there'll be skepticism for Israelis if it's someone coming from Al Jazeera. So you got to have to obviously overcome those. And the idea, again, as a journalist, is to find the truth and do whatever you can to make sure you're reporting as true as possible and trying to show both sides of a situation.
That's absolutely true. That is absolutely true. However, I think that over time we have as journalists, we have taken the Palestinians as a group of people who are just victimized. What about thinking of the Palestinians as a resistance group? Why don't we think of them as a resistance group?
Well, keep in mind too, you have, as being from Egypt, the Palestinians in that region, and people don't understand this. For example, our driver in Kuwait had been there he was his fourth or fifth generation Kuwaiti and was not Kuwaiti because he was Palestinian. He wasn't accepted in Kuwaiti society. And I think a lot of people need to understand that the Palestinians are a nomadic group of people, and there's others besides them in the region. And so, and they're being used. If it was just truly resistance, I think, that would obviously be an important fact, but there's more than that because they're used by the Egyptians, they're used by the Iranians, they're used by other surrounding nations to poke a thorn in the side of Israel, and they have been for years. I think that has to be brought into this as well. It's not just a resistance; they're also a conduit for other people that maybe have nefarious thoughts or ideas.
I beg to differ with you on that. I know Palestinians who have been evicted from their homes all the way back to 1948 when the wars started. Right. And they're not being used by anyone. They have their own identity, they have their own mindset. And the question
in Gaza or the West Bank?
But I'm sorry?
In Gaza or the West Bank, because they're two completely different areas.
They are the same people. We need to look at them on a humanitarian level.
In Gaza and how there are tunnels funneling weapons in.
Hold on, folks. It's okay to disagree. I like that.
Yeah, no.
But wait a minute, Adam. What I'd like people to do is be able to finish their thought, and then you're welcome to jump in. Go back. Go ahead, Lizette.
If we look at them as human beings rather than as pawns, I think that would be a good step forward. They're not being used by anybody. These are an independent entity, people who have been born in that region and who have been moved out of that region by wars that have been brought upon them. So one of the things that we need to do is just look at them as human beings who have been suffering. They're not pawns from anybody. Well, they're not being used by any country. That is a propaganda issue.
No, first of all, I do agree with you on one thing and disagree with you on another. Okay. Absolutely need to be looking at human beings. I have friends that are there. I worry about them and their safety. I've been to Palestinian parties. I've been to Israeli parties. One thing I'll say as a journalist, the first time I went there, and you know this from living there and growing up there, but a lot of Americans don't, is I expected the Jewish population to be white and the Arab population to be tan. And you get there and they're the same people in so many ways. They eat the same food. They listen to a lot of the same music. I mean, it's almost a war amongst brothers. And I think you're exactly right in one thing. We have to look at them as people. They are good people. I have nothing but amazing memories from my time in Gaza and in Palestine, wherever it be, West Bank or Gaza. I say to you, the reason why they are being used, I'm not saying they're not smart enough. I'm saying that they, as a group, they're absolutely being used by some countries, and they have been. I mean, how do you explain the tunnels funneling weapons from Egypt in, and also what's going on with Lebanon and Iran? There's absolutely no doubt that they've been used Now, they're also, at the same time, they're also fighting for their own right, correct? Whether you agree with that or not, they do fight for their own right. At the same time, they are being used. It's twofold.
Maybe their representatives are being used, but not the people themselves. The people themselves
in the middle.
Have a desire to be just like any other country, an independent group of people with their own government, their own state, their own values. These are half brothers. Look at it. They're half brothers. Go back to the Bible. They're half brothers.
Right.
Let me jump in there. Wait a minute. Let me jump in there real quick and say, I've had these type of discussions in my classes, Lizette. I know you have too. And students get very fired up about this. People watching this at home, I just want to say to you, it takes time sometimes to develop in an academic environment this type of candor. But I did ask our panelists to offer that. And I want to bring up something about language, the choice of words, the way we describe other people is something we talk about a lot with diversity and inclusion in this country. In Egypt, you have a different experience from the way you grew up, Lizette. You talk about that, and then we'll go back to Adam for a reaction.
Well, as I grew up, I had Palestinian friends, I had Jewish friends, I had French friends, I had friends from every country that I can think of that were represented in my school and in my university, which was the American University in Cairo. So it was natural for me to have friendships across different nations and across different religions. When I started becoming a journalist, that was my background. I could see people as people and not necessarily connected to any one nation or another nation. And when you are able to speak the languages of the people around you, I speak more than 3 languages. I speak 5 languages very fluently. That is normal in that area. And so you get to be friends, and you get to have connections that go back to your family and your ancestors as well sometimes. And this helps inform how you look at the population around you.
Okay, Adam?
No, I completely agree with what she's saying. I mean, there's no discounting one's personal background experience in the region and growing up in the region. I do think that, we have to keep something else in mind as we go forward with all this and talking about what's going on in Palestine, is that Palestine is also being run, at least in Gaza, by Hamas. And I have friends that say, oh, well, the Palestinians are all pro-Hamas. Well, you have to also understand that if you live in Palestine, you live in Gaza, and you're someone who is going to be against Hamas, you're risking your life in a very significant way. I mean, we know of people that have been dragged to their death because they didn't support Hamas in Gaza. So there's other variables that have to come into play here. Also keep in mind that because Hamas is in control there, they don't let outside, talking about growing up in Egypt, it's amazing. I have a couple of friends that grew up there that I still speak with that live here in the U.S. And unfortunately, it's one of the 2 countries I haven't gone to yet. So I one day got to get there. One of my friends was just there last week. But they talk about the backgrounds of people they got to grow up with. Unfortunately, because of Hamas, you don't get that background in Gaza. You just don't. I mean, in Gaza, you're not going to have someone who's a Christian or a Jew hold any position of power of any type whatsoever. In Egypt, you will. In Israel, you will. In Jordan, you will. And those are things we have to take into account, that unfortunately there's a ruling class in Gaza specifically that is not very conducive to being open with your political or personal beliefs.
Can you blame them?
Hold on a second.
I can blame Gaza. Absolutely. Gaza is absolutely a terrorist organization.
Hold on, folks. I want to bring in more of our panel. So hold on, folks. Jim Jacobs, please join us on screen. Jim, this is the kind of thing that your young journalists need to see. We can have a healthy, heated, sometimes differing point of view discussion, but it needs to be had. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and if you can imagine just the interaction we just had there, that was a good 5 to 8 minutes, right? We're talking to a young population, young people coming out of college. I'm lucky if I can catch their attention for 30 seconds. So imagine how they're trying to view this war in, basically sound bites on algorithms like TikTok and other things. They're trying to learn what's going on from an algorithm like that that's already feeding them what they like. That you're kind of amplifying those simple voices over and over and over again. And so it really takes what's a very complex issue, which I think Adam, when it was ever doing, and boiling it down to just something it's not a simple issue. It's a very complex, complicated issue that's got different nationalities, different languages, different socioeconomic situations, different politics involved. Now you're viewing it from the angle from the United States of how politics here might play into what's going on over there. We got a presidential election year. So you mix all of that together, and that's more than a 30-second TikTok video. But unfortunately, I'd say, students that are 18 to 22 to even up to 25, maybe, that's their news source. They're not watching news with their moms and their dads in their living room anymore at 5 and 6 o'clock to get a perspective in the room on what they just saw. They're getting it on their phone in their bedroom without anybody around them, and they're just getting fed over and over and over what they like, what they're sharing, what they're reposting. So these kinds of discussions are essential to helping to illuminate their thinking.
I don't see this as being heated, though. I think it's being respectful and being
hold on a minute.
I think it's just hold
on a minute, Adam. Hold on a minute. With all due respect, as a college professor, I will tell you, college students will see this as heated, and oh my God, I can't deal with this.
Well, that's the problem.
Wait a minute. I have, as the faculty member, I have to create a safe environment so they start to learn this is okay. But for the public watching this right now, yes, some people might perceive it. But Adam, hold your thought. I love your passion. Hold your thought, because I want to bring Anthony Mata back into this conversation, because I'm curious, do police officers ever talk to each other like this about the cultures represented in your communities?
Absolutely, Bob. And that's what makes us, I'm hearing some of the things that was being discussed, that, we need to be well-informed, well-read, a lot of emotions, a lot of passion, as we're seeing here today. But we also have to listen to the differing views. So yes, officers have talked about what's going on in different neighborhoods in the world, because it does affect our communities, right? We have, especially in San Jose, we have a very diverse community full of different ethnicities, religions, you name it. And we have to be well-informed and well-tuned into what's going on in the world, because we can walk into something that will be a normal call and not knowing the background or the history. That's going to create some issues, right? So officers need to be compassionate. They have to have understanding of what's going on, not only in their local communities, but also throughout the world, in order to help our community.
Very good. I want to give something new for the panel to chew on. In the surprise attack on Israel on October 7, what happened next brought up questions about time-honored traditions in journalism. The Israeli Prime Minister's office reportedly said early on in the conflict that there was evidence of babies being beheaded. President Biden used that same language in a speech from the White House. CNN's Sarah Seidner reported that with the proper attribution. Jim, you and I are we really like to press that with our students, and yet she had to go on the air later and apologize because there was no evidence of that, and the Prime Minister's office eventually confirmed there was no evidence. And yet, I spoke to her recently, and she told me that to this day, she's still getting hate messages from the Middle East on social media all the time. What about that experience for those of you who are journalists?
I mean, I've had death threats. I mean, that's one reason why I left Fox, to be honest with you. I would cover stuff that was, I'm doing a straight story, and one of the examples I'll use, one of the racial stories that came out, and a guy took my tweets from different stories, photoshopped them together and put them on social media and said, this guy wants so-and-so to die. And all I was doing was reporting the story exactly straight, and those things are beyond frustrating as a journalist. So imagine going to the Middle East and doing this now. I mean, it's not easy for any journalist to be in these situations, whether it be domestic or international, and to report things straight, because one side is going to do whatever they can to threaten you. The extremes. Now let's talk about the extremes. That's the key here, because we keep talking about one side or the other. But in reality, the professor and I, we consider, I could probably talk to her for 4 hours, because we're going to agree probably on 85 to 90% of everything. But people are going to focus on that 10% we don't agree on. And then they're going to go, well, that's what I'm against. And then they're going to use that against you. And I think that's what's really caused a lot of problems for journalists today, whether you're, again, reporting here locally in the US or internationally, is that people find that little bit they don't agree with, or maybe it's a bigger bit, and they use that against you. They threaten you, and it's just it's not right. It's not fair, and it's dangerous.
In a few minutes, I'm going to bring in a soundbite from the Middle East to talk about the perspective of the Palestinian people and also the humanitarian issue that's really electrifying the world. But Lizette, you look like you have something you want to say real quickly.
You know, we've often said that this problem of Palestine and Israel has been going on for years and years and years, and it is complex and complicated. When we look at it in this very simple way, what is it about? It is about the people who have not been able to get their own homes back, that were thrown out of an area during a war, and would love to go back to their homes, just like any other human being, any one of us on this panel would. So rather than saying it is complex, I think we should start looking at it as a very simple situation. People who have been disenfranchised and want to go back to their home. Why is that so complex?
But Lisette, it is complex because you're forgetting that Hamas is in control of Gaza, and you're forgetting that multiple countries have helped put together a two-state solution that was completely turned down by Hamas. That has to happen. I mean, a two-state solution is the only way we go forward.
Do you remember, excuse me, but do you remember what the two-state solution started? It started with Camp David. It started with President Anwar Sadat trying to make peace with Israel. It took one Arab leader to jumpstart the whole process. He had the gumption to go to Israel, talk to the Knesset, show himself as a human being and not as a monster.
Yep.
And people began to think about that.
Yep.
And eventually there was a peace accord that was set at Camp David by Kissinger, and everybody agreed that there would be a two-state solution with Jerusalem being the international capital.
Let me jump in real quick and say, Lizette, you were kind enough to share some photos with us where you actually had a chance to speak to Anwar Sadat years ago for his assassination. And you also were, there's that photo right there. And tell us about this moment and what was that like?
That moment, he was inaugurating a new city in Ismailia, if I'm remembering it correctly. And I was asking him about the peace process that was going on with Henry Kissinger. And he was kind enough to explain that, yes, there were negotiations were going on. And yes, they were thinking about the different phases of how to apply and comply with an agreement. And that was the difference between what his agreement was and then the other agreements that came after that, is that with the Egyptian agreement and the Israeli-Egyptian peace accord, there was a timeline that was specific and that was complied with. Do the other accords, I mean, people say, well, why the Palestinians refused the two-state solution? What were they given? The Palestinians were given Gaza and the West Bank, and there is a space in between. Would you accept to have a home that is partly in Newark and partly in New Jersey?
No, but I think weren't their plans also to connect the two. I mean, if you look at a couple of them, I just think there's more to it. Listen, Sadat, the fact that you got to interview Sadat to me is amazing. Obviously, I was young when he was in power, when he was assassinated, but we studied him a lot. And Lisette, I would love to talk to you away from this. I want to hear about Sadat. That's to me. I'm sitting there going, oh, she got to interview Sadat. That's like, as a journalist, that's phenomenal.
Now, this is a key moment, though. Adam, let me talk about that.
Sure.
You got to hear a connection with Lizette, and the picture that she provided opened up the possibility for all of us to connect as human beings. I really like that. I want to thank both of you for what you've been sharing with this, but I have to move on, and I want to bring in somebody from the Middle East and get all of your reaction, every member. About 8 years ago, a media student from Kuwait came to the Bay Area to study the American First Amendment mass communication theories and practices at San Jose State University. When Talal Al-Adenzi returned home, he was hired to bring his new technology skills and critical thinking abilities to the Ministry of Information in Kuwait City. Al-Adenzi told me in a one-on-one on Zoom, his nation was surprised by the Hamas attack on Israel and now are deeply troubled by thousands of Palestinians being killed or starving in Gaza.
This was a big shock. And then the whole context start after it, and people start jumping on it. All people were, in the Middle East, we usually are, biases to Palestinian because it's been the long history of conflict between, Arab and Jewish and who's involved in this. But on this matter, people start getting into this case because of the humanitarian crisis that's happening now in the Middle East. It's not about being, biased or patriotic or being Muslim or Jewish or, supporting your religion or your background. It's more about humanitarian. And I think this got to in all other societies in the world.
Very well said, and I really appreciate Talal doing that. We're running close now to 15 minutes before we have to finish, and there's a couple of more things I want to talk about, particularly with you two, but all of the panel if we can. There's been some accusations, and Jim, particularly I'm going to start with you on this one, that management in the United States, we're talking about broadcast station management, normally leaves news departments alone to do their thing. They don't get involved in the editorial decision making. And yet, on some of the, I will call it websites that media people go to in broadcasting, I'm seeing stories where they're saying on the East Coast and on the West Coast and the major cities, there's a strong influence from one culture, the Jewish culture, to talk to advertisers and TV management to tilt that coverage a little bit more towards Israel. Jim, any reaction to that?
At the local level, we don't get that here in a small, market 52, Fresno. I can imagine, markets like New York and Los Angeles, where New York is market number 1, Los Angeles is market number 2, and you're talking millions of viewers in each one of those locations. There may be some of that. I haven't heard that myself, but as we get down to the local level here in these middle markets, we don't have that. At least not now. We don't have any kind of pushback from national on what we do here locally.
Because that would be surprising to hear that sort of intervention, because we normally try to stay fair and balanced, and whatever is being reported.
Hey, you use an old Fox term there, fair and balanced. Listen, I think, and Lisette may agree with this too. I think you're always going to have influence. I mean, not as a journalist in the field necessarily, but I got to believe at the higher levels, just not on this topic only, on other topics as well. I mean, you're always going to have people that are going to call and try to twist an arm here or there at a bigger level, like Jim's talking about. That wouldn't surprise me. But a lot of times you're also going to hear this, and it might be one person saying it to somebody else. So until there's really true, people coming out as whistleblowers or whatever that give you the true inside information that this is happening, it's going to be a lot of it's going to be rumor. But at the same time, people calling and telling you to do one thing or another at a management level, it doesn't surprise me, not just with this topic, but others as well.
Now, would it surprise you though, and I must say it did surprise me, that there was someone else that I wanted to add on to this panel, and this individual is well-educated, excellent, major market television reporter, knows New York, knows LA, is of that caliber, okay? But he's very much convinced that if he were to go too far as a Muslim American television journalist, his management would fire him.
Well, I mean, I guess my question is he an opinion or is he a reporter? I mean,
I can vouch for his credentials. He's an excellent.
No, I'm not questioning that. I'm saying I guess his title, meaning that, for example, I come from Fox, right, where Fox became very opinionated, even more so. That's one reason why I left too. I left for a number of reasons, one being my family as well. When I first started there, we had a distinct news division, that there was no gray line. You were news or you were opinion. When I left, that was all out the window and it was all gray. So I guess my question is he supposed to be a straight news reporter who's giving facts, or is he somebody who is trying to be opinionated? And I think that's where he has to, you have to distinguish between the two. If he's going to be let go for giving facts, that's a concern. If he's going to be let go because he's giving an opinion, so I guess you have to find out what's his assignment really.
And Lizette, very quickly.
In the AP, we were never. I personally never had anybody tell me to downplay or to water down anything. It was being accurate. It was being non-biased. It was keeping your biases at the door. It was showing facts. There was no opinion in there. It was just using the story that you had in front of you and reporting it to the best of your ability by being accurate and being fair.
Very good. Odette, I see you on screen. What do we got?
What we've got is, on my end, when we're looking at the framework of DEI and belonging, something that I talked about earlier in my opening remarks, we're actually getting to that point of our own background, our diverse backgrounds, our journalists of color, are their unique lens, their nuance, their language sensibility, their cultural sensibility, are they not being leveraged and used when they do perform and execute their journalistic principles and mission in reporting the truth, but yet they have a special lens. I was talking about this last night with you, Lisette, in the Voice of America. A particular Spanish language reporter, Natalia Sancha, put together a book, Bullets for All. She gathered the voices of women journalists on the trenches, on the ground, because she felt that the collective narrative of women reporting on the war was so powerful. One of them being of Lebanese and American background, saying that her particular diversity, her heritage, allows her to look at the issues with a particular set of lens.
I agree with that. I mean, I have covered wars in the Sudan and Darfur, one of the earlier ones. I've covered wars in Egypt, in Israel, in Lebanon. I've been all over the Sudan trying to, cover Chad, refugees coming in from Chad, from Ethiopia, from Uganda. So yes, being a woman does allow you to see things in the perspective maybe of more humanitarian, especially when you're looking at babies and women being suffering. It does allow you to, and that does not mean that a man would be less sensitive to that. It just means that there is more of a drive, maybe an emotional drive to reach out to these particular people and ask them. And one of the things that people will say, well, how do you feel about being where you are? It's like, really, how do you feel? They are being persecuted. They're being chased from where they live. And now how do you feel is not the right question. Is what happens to you? Is how did this happen about? What are the prospects for the future? What aid can you bring to this situation? That has always been my mantra. As I reported all over those war zones, it has always been, how can I do my job in the fairest possible way? How can I be the vessel to transfer what I see, what I hear to the other side, and have it done as clearly and as conscientiously as I can and as accurately as I can.
And I shared that point with DEI and belonging being a universal or an all embrace, regardless of gender, regardless of your religion, your political bent. You as a journalist are reporting the truth, you're pursuing the truth, and the embrace of that, when you know you are performing your duty, your mission, is important to respect those lenses and not to be assaulted for them.
No, and I think what Lisette said is exactly.
We're getting close to the end, and there's one more thing I want to cover. So, Adam, if you would, the last word on this.
Yeah, I was going to say, real quickly, what Lisette said is exactly right. I think it kind of goes against a little bit what Odette was saying. I mean, obviously, everybody has different backgrounds. I don't care what color you are, what gender you are, where you grew up. I mean, we all have different backgrounds. But if you're a journalist and you're there covering as a journalist, not as an opinion person, your job is to take and tell people what you're seeing and what you're hearing. And to do it as fairly as possible. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter where you're from, no what you look like or anything. You are the conduit.
Absolutely. And so regardless of your background, you're there as a journalist, performing your duty, pursuing the truth, reporting on the facts.
Yep.
And one of the major realities that, Jim, you could help us out with is the change in television news viewers. When I was doing television, back when I had hair, we would get 60% share audience. And we were proud to say that we were a station leader in the country. Now those numbers are a lot smaller. And I want to bring to your attention and everyone else's a viewpoint that we are going to hear from Trevin, someone we met earlier in the program. He talked about traditional local television newscasts, while still attracting significant viewers, no longer command huge audiences like they once did. And so Trevin has some thoughts about expanding the number of newscasts is an old idea where new ideas would be welcome.
I will always believe in the power of reporting in any medium, and algorithms and social media has nothing on that. That's fickle compared to reporting that can change laws and can, change regulations and everything. It's got to be the core of what we do always. We can't lose sight of that in exchange for clicks and likes. It's got to be everything we do. And because that's, you see it across the country with papers closing, those are just as good reporters there. They lose their jobs. There's no one there at city council meetings and things. And we've seen, what the impact of those losses can be. And we have to fight continually to keep reporting at the heart of everything we do here, because the value today, I work in fact checking today. Like, it can feel like David versus Goliath because you're fact checking things on the entire ethos of the entire space of the internet.
And Jim, our television viewers here, members of the Academy, fact checking. That's something you have to drill.
Absolutely. Well, and like you said, I think journalism now, you've really got to really hold the powerful accountable on behalf of the voiceless viewer, voiceless audience member. That's really the differentiator between journalists and those on social media that might call themselves journalists, because there's people out there that claim to be journalists, and I don't think they really are. And I think Adam asked the right question of whether or not what's their mission. Is it an opinion thing, or is it really to get to the fact of the story and to present it in an unbiased way? I think part of the role of NATAS is to try and help our early career journalists understand there are biases out there, and how to combat those and be a real journalist now is becoming harder and harder, because we're battling clicks, algorithms, management that says, why aren't you getting higher clicks? What's going on with your digital numbers? We're getting questioned on numbers. So it's a constant battle, and it's a constant thing that you have to weigh. But I think we've got to use people like, Lizette and Adam that have done this before as mentors in a way to our early career journalists to show them the way.
Can I ask a question to Lisette on this too?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, but one of the battles I had, and one reason why I left, again, I have multiple reasons why I left, but I'm still doing things on an individual level, is that opinion was taking over our reporting time. You'd be out in the Middle East covering a story, or in Venezuela, wherever I happened to be, and they would throw someone in front of a green screen. They clearly had probably only been to a sandals resort in regards to international travel, and they're giving their opinion. And a lot of times opinion has no fact basis. And I'm out here in the middle of this going, wait a second, I just got my live shot canceled for some dude sitting in front of a green screen who's never even been here.
I agree with you. One of the things I tell my students all the time is you get a source, you confirm the source, and guess what? You reconfirm it. You affirm it. You find a way to double check at least 3 times what you're saying to avoid all of those pitfalls that are ahead of us.
I can see Odette is back with us, and that may mean we're running out of time. And so I wanted to thank all of you. I love these type of conversations. I hope the Academy continues doing them. Stop worrying about the emotion and the energy. Listen, as Lizette said, listen. And police chief, when you go back and talk to police officers, tell them that journalists are thoughtful people, and we don't try to go after them for no reason. With that said, I want to thank all of our panelists for being a part of this. And I also want to thank our viewers on YouTube and on Facebook. Certainly, we appreciate your support. And if I may, congratulations to all the nominees of the 2024 Regional Emmy Awards in the San Francisco Northern California chapter. All of you watching can go to our chapter website online to learn more about us, learn more about our chapter, to make reservations or accommodations for the annual gala each June, or just learn more about our special events. We're very active and a very diverse group. For now, thank you all, and I thank you for your time. I'll give it back to you, Odette.
Thank you very much, Professor Bob Rucker, for your deft moderation, and I want to thank the panel. I also want to end by offering a resource, something that I nuanced in my opening remarks. One of our signature DEI and Belonging frameworks in the Maynard Institute for Journalism Education is Fault Lines. And we talk about how do we dismantle entrenched biases, entrenched systemic inequities, because that impacts the lens by which news is covered. The first step is recognizing that we have our own biases, and what are these biases that can inform our impact or taint our coverage. I also want to commend seeing the Fresno State peaceful demonstration clip from KMPH through Jim, that we see the power of local journalism. Local journalism brings diversity, the full picture of what is out there and what various sectors are expressing and feeling. I want to again express our gratitude to our exceptional panelists, Lizette Poole, Adam Housley, Jim Jacobs, Tony Mata, and also our guest commentators who all provided their multi-layered insights and guidance for our members of NATAS SF in Northern California. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge and extend my profound thanks to our chapter's leadership, President Brooks Jaros, Executive Director Darrell Compton, and especially the core event team and DEI Committee of the Board of Governors of NATAS SF NorCal. Your expertise and support made today's webcast impactful. A special shout out to Steve Schlisky, our guru, our director, Patty Zubov, Jim Jacobs, Bob Rucker, Allison Gibson, Paula Markeski, Susan Bradley, Carolyn Tyler, Chris Sanchez, also Pamela Young and Lexi Six. We will continue to present more conversations and initiatives to propel our DEI and Belonging mission forward. We invite all of you to please send to us at the DEI Committee your ideas for future topics and initiatives. These serves as a resource. They all serve as a resource, support, and also news sources to our broader journalism community, not just our broadcast and digital media members. Our chapter president's email address, I know that Steve is going to flash that across the screen, is available to you, brooks@mesf.tv, for any of these suggestions and insights. Many thanks again to all of you for tuning in, our members, our journalism colleagues, and the public. Have a great rest of your day.